Hi there, welcome back to our channel. In today's video, we are going to talk about basement construction in Nigeria. Yeah, we've been having different projects, and of course, many of our clients ask about basements. So today we're going to explore different things to look at, the pros and cons, the advantages, the types, and different things one need to know about basement construction before you consider that in Nigeria. Stay tuned as we take you through the process.
In Nigeria, we understand that most of the clients now prefers having a basement in their building. I don't know the reason, but I think you're a specialist on when it comes to anything concerning building. So can you let's first of all go to what is basement?
Okay, basically, a basement is the lowest level of a building, typically located partially or entirely below ground level. Look, it serves as an extension of the building's foundation and can be used for various purposes, depending on the design and construction. Now, there are different ways this basement could come, and this could be a function of the topography, design, or actually what the client wants. In some cases, you see that a basement will be necessitated by the kind of soil and the kind of foundation needed for the project. But in some cases, it will be by what the client wants. And finally, another way a basement could be born is when the topography of the building site is not even steep, then it could lead to for a basement being necessary in the construction.
So, being known the definition of basement, now we want to understand what do you think about buildings with basement in Nigeria?
Okay, so these days it's becoming rampant, kind of, and to me, it makes a whole lot of sense because traditionally what we used to do is to fill some spaces with sand, because I have seen a number of construction projects that due to what is going to be done on the site, the recommended depth may be up to 2 meters or 2.4 meters or above that, right? And what most end up doing is to fill the entire space with sand, and this is total waste, and of course introducing a kind of weight to the foundation. But if a basement is introduced in this kind of space, it will definitely make that space useful. It could be used for storage, it could be used as a living space, it could be used as parking, it could be used as a utility room. So making use of such spaces, of course, one cannot overemphasize the importance. But I wouldn't fail to mention that there are some things that necessitate a basement. In a case where the land is fairly flat and the soil bearing capacity is really good, it may not really be necessary to introduce a basement unless the client specifically wants that. And now, of course, the builder or the contractor should be able to let the client know the implications of having a basement, which in most cases borders around the cost, borders around the integrity of the structure, and of course, aesthetics, and finally, the usefulness by the end of the day.
So, based on your thoughts about building a basement in Nigeria, can you kindly maybe highlight the factors to consider when choosing to build a basement in Nigeria?
Okay, so building a duplex with a basement floor in Nigeria requires careful planning and execution due to specific environmental, regulatory, and technical challenges. Now, let's look at a few of them. The first thing one needs to consider is the soil and land assessment, which is in the form of geotechnical survey. A detailed soil test is critical to assess the soil's load-bearing capacity, stability, and water table level. Nigerian soils is in some regions may be prone to erosion, flooding, and poor drainage, which can affect the basement structure drastically. It can actually affect the integrity of the entire building by the end of the day. Now, another thing that borders on that is the water table level. A high water table level can lead to flooding issues in the basement. Proper waterproofing and drainage system are necessary to mitigate this risk. 2. Waterproofing and drainage. Now, this is divided into 2. That's the moisture control. That basements in Nigeria, especially in areas with high rainfall or humid conditions, need extensive waterproofing to prevent water seepage and dampness. For instance, in riverine areas where there is high water table, you will notice that when you're excavating foundation trenches, you see water already. Now consider doing a basement in such areas. If the waterproofing is not done very well, it will definitely pose a problem to the building. Then the other thing to consider here is the drainage system, right? You need to install an efficient drainage system for this basement. This needs to be considered right from the planning stage. How are you going to remove wastewater or even drain water from that basement? The next thing you need to think about, that is the third factor here, is the structural integrity. Foundation design is very important when it comes to basements. You see that the duplex foundation must be designed to support the weight of the structure and prevent settling and shifting over time. Now, this implies when you're doing a basement, you have to consider the horizontal forces, that is from the soil, from the ground, and of course the vertical forces, which is going to be the load that is going to be introduced on it. Then you have to consider the reinforcement and load-bearing capacity of the foundation. Now, you use high-quality material like reinforced concrete to ensure the walls and flooring can support the entire weight, both the live and the dead loads that are going to be imposed on the structure. The fourth factor to consider here is the local building regulations and permits. Now, compliance with building codes. Now, you have to follow local building regulations, including permits for basement construction. Some regions may have specific restrictions on basement structure due to flood risk and land use policies. For instance, you will not be expected to do a basement floor where in a site that is prone to erosion and flooding. Now, zoning laws also comes into play here. You have to check local zoning laws to ensure that the building a duplex with a basement is allowed in the selected area. There may be limitations on the height of buildings, the setbacks, and the depth of basement within a locality. So all this is need to be taken into consideration. Now, the fifth thing to consider when thinking of building a basement is the ventilation and natural light. This one is very, very important, man. Now, think about the air circulation. Now, since the basement is a very low level, is below the ground level, you have to ensure that proper ventilation is taken care of to avoid dampness and mold buildup. Now, you can do that in the form of high-level windows or mechanical ventilation systems. And actually, the best thing to do is to have both of them, both the natural high-level windows and the mechanical ventilation system in place, so that when this one fails, of course, we will be sure of having the other do the job. The next thing is the natural light, daylighting. Now, you have to consider designing light wells, windows, or other methods to bring natural light into the basement, making it more livable and reducing the need for artificial lighting. Now, this brings us to the natural lighting thing. When designing a basement, you have to consider, how do I bring lighting into it? Of course, we know we're in Nigeria that we don't have 24/7 electricity. So it's becomes imperative that when you're designing the basement, you have to think about how to light it up without solely depending on artificial lighting. Now, the sixth factor to consider here is flood and erosion control. Now, in flood-prone areas, you have to invest on protective measures such as elevated entrances, sealed basement walls, and proper landscaping to direct water away from the structure. Now, this brings to play planning when you want to do basements. So you have to consider, is this place prone to flooding? So if it is, then you have to make sure that flood does not enter into that basement by channeling all the water away and making sure that the walls are water resistant kind of. Then the next thing you need to think about is erosion management. Now, depending on the location you want to build your basement, you need to think about, you may need to implement erosion control measures to prevent soil wash out around the foundation. So if you want to build your basement around an area that is susceptible to erosion, then you need to plan it from the beginning. Once you finish your building, you need to make sure that whatever erosion that comes within that area does not get to your building, so that you don't have access to the basement floor. Then the seventh thing to consider here, which I presume may be the most of concern for most people, is the cost implications. Now, of course, you know that building a basement means budgeting for extra costs for the building. You know, building a place with a basement will require additional funds for excavation, waterproofing, and structural reinforcement. Because you know, doing a basement means you're going to do retaining walls, even if it's just going to be the four walls that are preventing the horizontal movement of the soil to enter the building. Of course, they are going to be well reinforced. Then the next thing is utility connections. Now, when you are building a basement, you need to think about, how do I remove the water that comes into this basement? For instance, the wastewater. If there's going to be a toilet, how do you remove it? If there's going to be any form of water that enters that basement, how do you remove it? Since the basement is below the ground level, so you need to think about all this and use a sump pump to remove such things. So all those things need to be planned into space before you start thinking about basements. So in fact, there are many factors to look into before doing a basement construction in Nigeria. But I will round this up by just mentioning the last one on my own list, although there are more, but we'll just wrap it up here, which is basement purpose and layout. Now, this borders on the functional design. Now, you have to decide the purpose of the basement early in the design process. Whether it is storage, living space, or garage, or utility room, a layout will determine specific design features like ceiling heights, access points, and the division of the rooms. So at the beginning of the design stage, you need to think about it and know, what do I want to use this basement for? And of course, this will guide how high and how you will divide the spaces. Then the next thing to think about here under this topic is accessibility. Now, you have to ensure that access to the basement is safe and convenient, whether through internal staircase or external doors. So this is going to be taken care of right from the planning stage. So considering all this and looking at all these things will help one when you want to build a basement floor in Nigeria to get it right at the first time.
Now, knowing the fact of to consider when building a basement in Nigeria, can we know the do's and don'ts of a basement construction in Nigeria?
Okay, when constructing a basement in Nigeria, it is essential to follow specific guidelines to ensure the project is structurally sound and protected from potential hazards such as flooding and moisture problem. Now, the things that needs to be taken into consideration we have mentioned. So now the do's and don'ts include Number one, you have to conduct a geotechnical survey. Now, you have to perform a soil test to determine the soil bearing capacity, the water table level, which would guide the design and construction methods, particularly in regions prone to flooding and regions with weak soils. Number two thing to do is to prioritize waterproofing. Do invest in proper waterproofing system. Use high quality waterproofing membranes, waterproof concrete and moisture barriers to prevent water seepage and dampness in the basement. Now you have to install drainage systems like French drains, sump pumps, or gravel-based foundations to manage water runoff and prevent flooding. Now, the third thing to do is to ensure proper ventilation. This one can never be overemphasized because, of course, we know that if the place is not well ventilated, it could even cause some kind of sicknesses. So you need to install effective ventilation system. You know, basements in Nigeria, of course, we know we have a humid climate here. It can easily get damp and stuffy. Now, to ensure proper ventilation, we have to use vents, fans, and mechanical ventilation to prevent mold and mildew from forming in the basement. Now, in addition to, where necessary, putting a high-level window. The fourth thing to do is to use high-quality material. Of course, all of us know that this one is a no-brainer. You have to choose durable and weather-resistant materials when you are building your basement structure. It is very important. Now, you have to use water-resistant paints and coatings to help serve as extra layer of protection against moisture in the basement. Then the fifth thing to do is to plan for drainage. You have to design a comprehensive drainage system around the building, ensuring that water does not enter into the basement, that water is properly channeled away from the basement. The next thing, of course, this also means you have to incorporate a sump pump when necessary to help remove any water that in one way or the other has gotten into the basement. The sixth thing to do is to adhere to local building regulations. So you have to ensure that you get the proper permits and approvals from the local building authorities before starting your construction. Now, of course, we know that this one is a general thing that needs to be done before you start any building construction in Nigeria. Then the seventh thing here is to ensure the structural integrity of the building. You have to ensure that that you reinforce the foundation and basement walls to support the weight of the building above and prevent structural shifts or cracks over time. Now, you have to also include provision for future maintenance, making sure that the plumbing, electrical, and ventilation systems are easily accessible for inspection and repairs. Now, the eighth thing to do here is to plan for lighting. Now, I've mentioned it before, you have to maximize the use of natural day lighting. This means incorporating windows or skylights or window wells, whichever way you can incorporate windows that will introduce natural day lighting, particularly in Nigeria where we are not sure of 24/7 lighting. Using natural day lighting actually plays to our advantage. Then, of course, you have to plan for adequate artificial lighting too. Once you have the natural day lighting, you also think of how to artificially light up the space by choosing energy efficient lighting options that brighten the space effectively. Finally, you have to ensure proper pest control. You have to implement control measures, because when the basement is under attack by pests, it could actually, like rodents, cockroaches, and termites, it could actually lead to different forms of damages to the construction project. Now, the don'ts of building a basement in Nigeria. Now, this, of course, there are also a number of things you should not do when you're considering building a basement in Nigeria. For instance, do not ignore water table levels. Don't build a basement in areas with a high water table without proper water management system in place. Because if you neglect this, it will result to chronic flooding, dampness, and in some cases, structural defects to the building. 2. Don't skimp on waterproofing. Do not play with it. Waterproofing materials and systems, because if you inadequately use them, inadequate use of these materials will lead to serious water infiltration issues. Don't assume that natural drainage is sufficient. Don't. In building a basement, you need to plan for contingencies. For instance, what if the natural one fails? You have to plan for artificial way of removing the drain waters or waste waters from the basement. The third thing to not do is overlook ventilation. Don't ignore the need for air circulation. Poor ventilation can lead to moisture buildup. It can lead to mold and unhealthy living environments in the basement. Don't rely solely on natural airflow. In most cases, mechanical ventilation will be necessary to maintain healthy airflow within the basement. So these things are very important. Fourth thing to not do is do not build without proper excavation support. Don't neglect shoring or support during excavation. When you are excavating, of course, building a basement means your excavation may get to the depth of 2.4 meters or even 3 meters depth. And the kind of sand that will come out from there needs, there's something that we call timbering or what do they call it, shoring. So you have to kind of use wood or other kind of support to stop the sand from falling back into the excavated area when excavation is ongoing. Do not neglect that, because it could cause double work, or in some cases even cause hazard inside the excavation area. Now, the fifth thing not to do is do not overload the foundation. When you underestimate the weight the basement walls and floor will bear, it could cause problem to the building. The sixth thing is don't forget to consider future maintenance. So when putting anything in place, be it drainage, electrical or mechanical pipings, utilities, think of maintenance. Now, the seventh thing not to do is do not ignore zoning and building codes. There are regulations guiding every kind of building and zoning within an environment. So do not neglect that. Ensure that whatever you are doing is supported by the law within the area you are building. The eighth thing not to do is do not use low quality construction materials. Please, this is very important, because sometimes we go to the market and see quality materials may be expensive and you're thinking of cheaper ones. Please do not neglect quality of construction materials when building a basement. The last thing not to do here is don't neglect safety precautions. Don't overlook safety features such as fire escapes, emergency exits, and sufficient lighting, particularly if the basement will be used as a living space. Now, by following the do's and don'ts we've mentioned, I'm sure you can create a safe, functional, and durable basement in Nigeria that stands up to local, environmental, and structural challenges. So, in the next video, we are going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of a basement. Then the types of a basement. Now we're going to use our live projects to show you how basements are done in Nigeria. The ones we've done, the types of basements, and the kind of spaces we're able to get from basements in our projects here in Nigeria. Thank you for being with us this far, and see you in our next one.